Okay, I don't think we're expecting any student audience.
No.
All right, so okay, since everybody is here, I know it's not, it's time already anyway. So just to make sure that everybody can see his slides, can? Okay, so let's begin. Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to today's repeat PhD oral examination, where the candidate Hon Jia will be presenting his PhD work entitled "A Study of Interest in Learning in a Maker-Centered Learning Environment." So, I'm Adrian, and I shall be the chair of this session. The other members, Prof. Chen Wenli, head of LSA, internal examiner, Prof. Tan Xing Chi, nominated oral panel member, Prof. Wang Qiyun. The supervisor is Prof. David Hung. The co-supervisor is Dr. Kenneth Lim. So as part of this exam, it has two objectives, right? First is to test the candidate's knowledge in the field, and then to determine that the candidate has indeed become an expert in his work. And then B is to satisfy the panel that the thesis is indeed the work of the candidate. So allow me to explain the process. The candidate will be given 30 to 40 minutes to present his work, and then the panel members will ask questions. Throughout this session, the supervisor will play a silent, supportive role, and then the chair reserves the right to ask questions and moderate the proceedings. When the panel is satisfied with the question and discussion, the candidate will leave this meeting, and then we will deliberate on the outcome of this examination, which is one of the following, right? Pay attention to this. There will be only 3 outcomes. A, pass the oral exam without further amendments to the thesis. B, pass the oral exam with some amendments to the thesis. So these 2 classifications are the cases of passing, right? Whether with amendments or no amendments. And then the third option and the final one is to fail the oral examination. That's the third option. So when a decision has been reached, the candidate will be invited back into the conversation, and then we will announce the results. So yes, please bear in mind that this is an exam, so do turn off your microphone if you're not speaking. However, if there is a breakdown in communication, you can't hear properly or whatever, please voice it out so that we can rectify it as soon as we can. Hon Jia, I pass the time to you.
Okay. Before I start, let me check the volume. Is it okay?
It's great.
Okay. First, I'd like to apologize first. I must admit I'm not good at communicating through the online screen, and I kind of rely a lot on the visual cues, eye contact, and social interactions when I communicate. So I'm sorry, I just realized my shortcomings recently. Okay, let me start with. So the title of my thesis and today's presentation is a study on interest in the learning in a maker-centered learning environment. This is an overview of the topics that will be covered in this presentation. I will take you through this study, starting with the research problems and ending with the discussions and implications arising from this study. Several studies have reported the decline of interest in learning, especially in STEM-related subjects. This is a serious concern in today's world, where we are at the tipping point of facing the calamities of climate change. On top of that, we are also facing the challenge of more frequent pandemics. We need innovations, not just in technology, but also in mindsets. And if our young are not interested in learning in STEM-related innovations, we are into serious problem. Nature has its resilience in fighting back, so do us. Take, for example, the emergence of makerspaces. Several studies have reported positive impacts on makerspace programs in increasing students' interest in learning and in STEM. What is it about makerspaces that seems to buck the trend? Is it in the way we understand the concept of interest? Is there something unique about the social and cultural context of a makerspace. This led us to the next logical problem. How have you been looking at the concept of interest? Fortunately, there have been studies that point us in the right direction. Several studies have argued for the need to expand the concept of interest from one that is individualistic to one that encompasses the social and cultural dimension, from one that focuses on the intra-mental dimension to one that encompasses the inter-mental dimension. This study aims to investigate the concept of interest in relation to the social and cultural construct, using makerspace as the context. To investigate the problems mentioned earlier, the main research questions of this study focuses on the relationship of two main areas, namely the student's interest in learning and the social context in a makerspace. And through the lens of activity theory, as it offers a robust framework and structure to investigate the social interactions and mediating agents within the community. Hence, the main research question, how do the social networks in a makerspace influence the interest in learning through the lens of activity theory? To investigate deeper, two sub-research questions were formulated. One aims to investigate students' preferred mode of learning in a makerspace. The other aims to investigate students' interest in STEM in a makerspace. Hence the question, how do the affordances of a makerspace support students' preferred mode of learning? And the question, how does a makerspace support students' interest in STEM-related activity? Literature reviews were conducted in relation to makerspaces, the concept of interest, and activity theory. Studies have shown that the learning outcomes of maker-centered learning usually prioritize character building and dispositions such as agency over disciplines, knowledge, or skills. In a study, it was reported that the youth in a makerspace usually find that they have a greater say in what and how to make. Several studies have reported that makerspace allows a person to develop interest in STEM. Numerous studies have been conducted to investigate the concept of interest. For example, interest is differentiated into short-term and long-term in the form of situational interest and individual interest. In a model explaining the development of interest called the four-phase model, the approach was to connect interest from the time of emergence, progressing to the time where it settled into a well-developed form in an individual. However, this concept of interest primarily revolved around interest as an individual construct. Several studies have argued for the need to reconceptualize interest. For example, instead of interest as an individualistic construct, interest is treated as a social mediated artifact. Hence, studies have argued for the need to consider the social, cultural context and interpersonal processes within which individual activities such as interest occurs. Activity theory allows a framework to study the social cultural context in which interest occurs. In this study, there are multiple activity systems in a makerspace, and the interactions between these activity systems were investigated. There are studies that have reported how cross-boundary interactions between activity systems offer a larger context towards fostering higher level of students' epistemic engagement. In another study, it was reported that boundary object formed between activity systems serve as a common object to bind together to bind them together. In a more recent study, it was reported that tensions emerge as new activity systems attempts to influence well-established activity systems towards a more active learning role. And these boundary activities systems were investigated through the lens of activity theory. Activity theory has its roots in bridging the intra-mental construct to the intermental construct. In the second generations of activity theory, the concept of community was considered. And this brings about a wider perspective of how community influence the objective outcome of an individual. In the third generation of activity theory, an even wider perspective and social context is considered. For example, it brings into attention multiple different communities interact and influence each other. This led to the emergence of at least two properties. One is the emergence of boundary objects between activity systems. The other is the emergence of boundary conditions of the activity systems, both of which are the objects of interest in these studies. The diagram illustrates activity system devised in this study. The subject of the activity is represented by the student. The community is represented by the classmates, project group members, and course facilitators. The immediate learning goals of the students are to build prototype, complete project work, and submit assignment. The activity system is supported through mediation by artifacts, rules, divisions of labors among the community. In this study, the affordances of a makerspace and the maker-centered pedagogical approach are considered as part of the mediating artifacts. There are altogether 18 participants in this study. 2/3 of them are males and 1/3 are females. They came from 3 cohorts of students and from 8 academic disciplines. Roughly half of them have at least a few years of experience in an IHL STEM-related discipline, which include their time in Polytechnic. The participants in these studies were all attending an elective module conducted in NIE, which has a focus on the Internet of Things. The elective module runs for about 3 months, with 8 to 8 face-to-face sessions, each session is about 3 hours. The same 3 course facilitators conducted the module for all the 18 participants. Same materials and hands-on activity kits were used. The hands-on activity kits include microbits and Lego Mindstorms. Their project works involve creating prototype or proof of concept. The classroom where the sessions were conducted was designed as a makerspace. The furniture was highly configurable. There were plenty of discussion space, including mediating artifacts like the TV screens. There were workbench with electronics tools and a corner for 3D scanning. There were past projects on display and plenty of electronics gadgets for use in the cabinets. In the makerspace and during the sessions, the students were free to tinker and make things. They were also free to mingle and interact with different people. The curriculum was designed so that they were free to choose the projects to work on and the group members to work with. During the hands-on activity sessions, they were free to decide the number of iterations of the prototype created. In this study, mixed method was adopted. This study is primarily qualitative, supported by quantitative data. This study uses single-phase design, where instruments used were implemented during the same time frame. The instruments used include survey, classroom observation, social network, focus group discussion, and semi-structured interview. Thematic analysis was used to address the research questions of this study. This is an overview of the methodology used in this study. It shows the development from data collections using various instruments to conducting thematic analysis and generating the codes from making sense of the data collected, to identifying the main themes that emerged, to finally relating to the research questions. We will visit this diagram again and again in subsequent parts of this presentation. So there were 4 main themes identified, namely mode of learning, social and physical support, autonomy of learners, and finally, social network in the makerspace. Next, I will be showing some examples of codes used in identifying the themes. Through the data collected from various instruments, meanings and contexts were extracted to generate the codes that are useful for thematic analysis. The codes were grouped to identify the themes that emerged. For example, the codes on the left of the table leads to the theme social network in the makerspace, and the theme relates to the main research question on the right, on how social networks in the makerspace influence interest in learning. In the interest of time, I will only give 1 or 2 examples of how the codes came about for each theme. For example, students were observed interacting among themselves in the sessions, and they talked and discussed with each other, especially during hands-on sessions. This was coded as social interactions. Another example, the students were observed to work in a group, and the frequency of the group activity increases. This was coded as group activities. This table shows the codes themes that relate to the research sub-questions on how the affordances of makerspace support students' preferred mode of learning. From the codes generated, 2 themes were identified, namely mode of learning and social and physical support. For example, the extract from the student, which highlighted the flexibility of the learning environment, was coded as flexible learning environment. The extract from the student, which described the support received from the teachers, was coded as support from teachers. These tables shows the codes and themes that relate to the sub-research questions on how does a makerspace support students' interest in STEM-related activity. From the codes generated, the theme that emerged was autonomy of learner. For example, the extract from the student, which highlighted the autonomy of the class, which helps to facilitate discussion and learning, was coded as autonomy in learning. In the following slides, I will go through the results, analysis, and discussion in relation to the research questions one by one. First, I will present the results and analysis in relation to the theme social network in the makerspace, followed by the discussion in relation to the research questions. This is a snapshot of some of the activities that were conducted during the sessions. Through these social and sometimes hands-on activities, the social networks that emerged were plotted and analyzed. This is an overview of the social networks representing 4 different sessions at the earlier part of the course. From For each social network, 3 values were computed. They are the average clustering coefficient, average path length, and network density. This is an overview of the social networks from another 4 sessions at the later part of the course. Looking at individual social network and values alone might not reveal much. Therefore, in this study, the values from all the social networks are plotted in a graph to reveal hidden patterns. The result of plotting the computed values against the progressions of the sessions reveal something, a global pattern. The orange graph represents the average path length in an upward trend. Similarly, the blue graph represents the average clustering coefficient in an upward trend. Whereas on the other hand, the gray graph represents the network density in a somewhat downward trend. From the results of the social network analysis, coupled with the context where the activities had taken place, the increasing trend for the average clustering coefficients and average path lengths correlates with the sessions becoming more student-centric, with more hands-on and group-based activities. One takeaway is that as the clustering among students groups increase, the ease of connections between the groups decrease. This is an indication of boundary formation among the activity systems, which regulates the connection between activity systems. In addition, the decreasing trend for the network density also coincides with the formations of group-based activities among the students. This led to a positive impact on the reduction of overall conformity across the activity systems and on the creativity among the students, as shown by the prototypes created by different groups of students. Let's take a look at what does it mean to the research question on how do the social networks in a makerspace influence interest in learning through the lens of activity theory. First, is a need to expand the embodiment of mediating artifacts in activity systems to include the ideologies and dispositions that both the individual and community brought with, in order to better account for the influence of social context in mediating the activity systems in a makerspace. Second, is the usefulness in considering the boundary conditions of an activity system in mediating and regulating the interactions and relationships between activity systems. This would also help in dealing with the object that emerge beyond the boundary. With the expansion of the embodiment of the mediating artifacts and the considerations of the boundary conditions, it affords a structure to fill the gap between the boundary objects and the activity systems. One of these intra-boundary elements that emerge as a result of the ideologies and dispositions of an individual and community is what I call system-level interest, which is a social construct. It is influenced by both the boundary objects and the activity systems, and it also serves as a conduit between the two. When we put them together in a multi-activity systems, the adapted chat provides an expanded framework in studying cross-boundary interactions between activity systems. It allows a richer structure, such as different layers of boundary conditions and intra-boundary elements that mediates interactions, such as system-level interest. Next, in the following slides, I'll go through the results, analysis, and discussion in relation to the sub-questions sub-research questions. First, I'll present the result analysis in relation to the theme mode of learning and social and physical support, followed by the discussion in relation to the research question. This table shows the results of survey related to the theme mode of learning. These are the results plotted as charts, and we'll look at the charts in more detail. From this chart, the most preferred mode of learning was lecture, followed by team hands-on, individual hands-on, and lastly, self-study. From this chart, the most preferred resource of learning was lecture, which supported the result from the previous chart. It was an interesting and puzzling thing that the students had indicated very positive experiences and feedbacks toward Makerspace. So what else could support or explain this dichotomy? So let's look at the results from the extracts of the students. It provided another perspective. This perspective shed light on the theme, social and physical support. The recurring message from this theme is that the social and physical support found in a Makerspace had sparked their interest in learning. And this interest in learning transcended across different modes of learning. Therefore, the social and physical support in a Makerspace could support other modes of learning, both structured and unstructured types. Let's look at what does it mean to the sub-research question on how do the affordances in a Makerspace support students' preferred mode of learning? Firstly, Makerspace had a positive impact on students' preferred mode of learning, even if it is not maker-centered learning. Secondly, Makerspace can coexist with other modes of learning. Thirdly, Makerspace can be mutually supportive with other modes of learning, and other modes of learning can support Makerspace too. Next, in the following slides, I will go through the results, analysis, and discussion in relation to the remaining sub-research questions. The extracts from the students strongly suggested the positive impact of having autonomy in learning, especially towards their interest in STEM-related activities. For example, for students who from having lost interest in STEM previously to wanting to apply IoT to his daily life, such as in sailing, windsurfing, and making his auto-closing curtain. Although having the autonomy in learning was welcomed by most of the students, some of them had also found that it could be a challenge. The challenge was not just in how an individual managed his or her own autonomy, but also in how the community share and manage the distributed autonomy. Let's look at what does it mean to the sub-research question on how does a Makerspace support students' interest in STEM-related activity? From the findings, the Makerspace had a positive impact in cultivating and sustaining students' interest in STEM-related activity. One of the key contributing factors that recurred throughout was that the students make connections of the STEM-related activity to their lives, be it to their academic pursuits, future careers, or personal interests. Another contributing factor is the transformation of interest from the individual dimension to a larger social dimension, which I call collective interest or system-level interest. Another interesting findings from this study is that unfamiliar environment, when coupled with autonomy, in a makerspace could lead to an increase in a sense of maker agency and creative confidence. One important aspect that arises from previous findings and discussions is the concept of shared autonomy. A social and culturally rich context, such as a makerspace, allow an individual's interest to grow together with a sense of autonomy, but mediated by their social environment, which led to the transformation of intramental construct to intermental construct in the form of shared interests. And ultimately, for the community to share a common interest, there's a need to have a sense of shared autonomy. However, shared autonomy does not remain static or isolated, and constantly evolved with the system. And shared autonomy requires diversity, negotiation, and sharing of a common object. In a teaching and learning environment, tension exists between the level of autonomy and between the level of autonomy of the learners and the level of intervention by the teachers. From this study, the implication to the conceptualization of interest is that there's a need to expand the concept of interest to include the social context and influence. The implications to the use of activity theory are that it is useful to expand the structure of boundary crossing activity systems and boundary objects to include boundary conditions. And it is also useful to expand the embodiment of mediating artifacts to include social elements, such as ideologies and dispositions. Finally, the implications to the education practice are that it is beneficial to integrate makerspace into the classroom to support various established teaching and learning approaches. To foster interest in STEM learning, both depth and breadth are needed. Breadth to allow a wider range of choices, and depth to allow deeper and more meaningful pursuit. However, there are also challenges in makerspace. For example, for students who need more guidance or are not motivated, they would need the active intervention by the teachers. Lastly, social support has been found to be beneficial to makerspace, and I believe it can be translated to be beneficial to remote and online learning, which has become a very important part of our education system today. Thank you, and I'd like to thank my PhD supervisors, Prof. Hang and Dr. Kenneth, and I'd like to thank the panel members, Prof. Tan and Prof. Wang Wang, and Prof. Chen and Prof. Key.
Okay, you're done?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, may I invite the examiner? Xingji, you want to start first?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Hon Jia. I read your revised thesis. It's much more coherent, much more convincing. There's logical flow of the arguments, and your presentation slides is very clear. I think you should appreciate the efforts of your supervisors that helped you along this journey. I believe they have actually put in a lot of effort in guiding you. Regardless, I think there's still more questions for you. Okay, this is a normal process of PhD examination. Okay, so there are always room for improvement. So we're here to help you to think of some of the ways in which you can clarify further. So a couple of questions, some are very short, simple questions. Some may need you to think a bit more. Just want to clarify about your clustering coefficient and path length slide. Which slide is that? Clustering coefficient and path length is the yeah, okay. So we see this very clear depiction of this trend here. Just want to clarify whether increasing trend is better. Like path length when it increases, what does it mean? I think, yeah, maybe you can explain to us.
I think one important thing to think about is the context. As a value may go two ways depending on the context. So when the clustering coefficients increase, average clustering coefficient increase, implies the connectivity, average connectivity among the nodes increase. So it's good in a sense, in terms of, if you look from the point of view of in a way teamwork, how they bind together. But if you look at from another point of view that we may prioritize independent thinking, diverse thinking, then we may have a different take on that. So a single value where, let's say, it's implied that the groups are very tightly knit together. In certain contexts can be good. In certain contexts, it may not be if they are heading towards the, in a sense, I may say, to the wrong path. And
okay, so actually, the part that I was still trying to rationalize is the increase in average clustering coefficient means that there are more nodes around each node, is it?
More connectivities among.
More connectivity, okay. But there's decreasing network density. What does that mean? Okay. The two doesn't seem to gel together.
Yes. These are. Let me go back to the appendix. May I go? Okay. So, in a way, so if we see individual points in the network as a node, so the clustering coefficients look at how the nodes around the neighborhood of the nodes are being connected, how much is being fulfilled, versus the network density is the proportion, proportion of the possibilities of ties that are actually actualized within the network. So,
so it's possible for clustering coefficient to go up, but the network density to go down.
Yes. So and it got to do with how the network is being connected, and to which node, and how spread out the nodes. So in your case, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Understand. Yeah. Just to clarify also the use of word coding. Okay, because I think you use the word coding, which is fine for some of the data. Okay. But I believe you're also a survey, right? So yes. I'm not quite sure whether I can apply the word coding to a survey, because survey is predetermined questions, right? So you already have something in mind that you want the students to answer. I'm not quite sure whether you can call that coding. What do you think?
Okay. Actually, in the survey, there are two parts. One is the parts where they provide the inputs in the numerical value. There is the other part, which is the open-ended questions. So I guess the open-ended question part, I think is more acceptable when you apply the word codings. Having said that, the numerical part, I think the important things to note is that the numerical represents something, and it is how we contextualize these numerical values. that we are talking. That's what we mean by coding.
Understand. Yeah. So maybe coding may not be representative for all situations. Maybe what themes is better representation.
I see.
Well, you can think about that, and of course, consult a supervisor about that. Okay. Then something also a bit minor, but quite it came out in your presentation. You mentioned the word ideology, and what's the other one? Disposition.
Yes.
Okay. Disposition is mentioned in your thesis, okay, but ideology is not. Okay.
Yes.
So I think it's quite dangerous to introduce a new term during your oral presentation, which is not mentioned in your thesis. Okay, so I think every term that you use in your PhD thesis, you must think through carefully, because if you mention a new term, okay, but you didn't explore in your thesis or in your study, okay, that can be dangerous. Okay, so I suggest if you do have a chance to do similar kind of presentation in conference or whatever it is, okay, think through carefully what terms you use. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, something that needs you to think a bit more is about your coding again. I think your coding, I can see social network connecting to question 1 very clearly. Mode of learning, social physical support connecting to question 2. A bit more distant connection here is autonomy of learner versus the interest. So I think here, although they are related, okay, but I think that the choice of word autonomy of learner as the code, as the main theme, okay, versus answering the research questions on interest, okay, this part you need to think through more carefully whether you want to use the term autonomy of learner, and then it has some relationship with interest, so it's hidden. Okay, so I think the labeling of the theme needs to be reconsidered especially for autonomy of learner.
Okay.
Okay. Then another small clarification is slide 35. Slide 35, which is a very interesting diagram. I think this is important here. Okay, just want to okay, I think this is something very interesting. Just want to hear from you a bit more about, in your case, right? So how would you put some concrete example to this diagram? So your 2 sites, 2 activity systems, what do they refer to in your study? And then your 2 interests as a mediate. What do you call that? I'm not quite sure what's the label you use for the interest. Okay. And then you have the 2 objects, object 2, and then object 3. Can you put some concrete example in your study to this diagram?
Okay. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to explain. Okay, I think the activity systems, what we can look at in this context of the makerspace is that there are the students where they work in different groups. So each group is considered an activity system. And then the next question is, what is the system level interest? So for one concrete example is that one of the students is interested in fish. So he managed to influence his fellow group members to embark on this project that's related to fish. So in a way, and then they use heavily sensors. They use sensors heavily to detect. So basically, the project was in Yunnan Garden, where they put sensors into the Yunnan Garden fish pond to detect the various conditions of the water and things like that. So when throughout the discussion, the group's member actually interacted between different groups. So the other groups was interested in also aroused their interest, which is related to sensors. That in this case, sensing the I think another situation in the school in NTU. So it's like it triggered them to think about in a sense, although it's not about fish anymore, but it's still detecting certain conditions around. So in a way, so collectively, so it initiated with an interest from a particular person in a group to a collective interest for the whole group, which in fact, and then when they interacted between different groups, the idea bounced off. So in a way, you can see if we simplify in terms of the idea exchange of ideas, so the ideas bounce off. And I will say that as in a way the ideas is infused to their outcomes. Over here, the objects was to create the projects as part of the so-called coursework. So they have to come out with a project. So the projects, while it's still in taking shapes, so it's not finalized at the moment. So they kind of like bounce off to each other's idea and look at the feasibility. How much should we go, and then to what extent are you doing it? Are you able to actually create a prototype and things like that? So in a way, they influence each other's decision, and for example, how far they want to go, what kind of technology or components that are using. So I would say that objective, which is they have an objective to create a prototype or proof of concept, and there's a so-called interlink between their objective.
Okay, yeah, I think this diagram is if you want to do a presentation, let's say in conference, okay, you use this diagram, and then you put in the concrete, a link to the concrete, okay, because you're presenting something at an abstract level that doesn't convince the audience or readers that what you're talking about. Okay, so you already have the theoretical level, which is this diagram, which is good. Okay, you need to connect to the concrete level as well. Okay, so you actually toggle between the two levels so that the audience can understand better. Okay. And also, this diagram, is it found in your thesis?
Good point. So I think while I'm doing this presentation, it kind of make my mind clearer what I want to articulate. So this is I think there's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think this diagram is actually better than what you presented in your thesis. So one suggestion is for you to think through, because I found your presentation, again, you made some changes, which is okay, perfectly fine. Just that some of these things that you have made changes in your presentation slides, which are very good, you can think about incorporating them into your thesis.
Definitely.
So for instance, the way that you represent how the different required coding of themes, how they answer the research questions is very clear in your slides. Okay, it's not as clear in your thesis. Okay, so after today's presentation, you can think about how to incorporate some of this good work they have done in the presentation, in preparation of the presentation, back to a thesis. Yes. Okay, that will make our thesis even better. And one final question, okay, that you have been through so many revision, reflect on your revision experience, okay, and all this experience that you have gone through. What have you learned about writing a PhD thesis?
Okay, I think at different level. First thing is actually right from the start, I should be more careful right from the start in and also be consistent. What do I mean by careful right from the start is in choosing the area to tackle, the problems to look at. I think I started with something very broad, and then it kind of like complicates things as I go along. And I try to narrow it down. And I do think that there are still rooms for me to even make this whole thing tighter and narrower. And also consistent, I guess, because of so many revisions, I guess for me, it was a challenge because of the changes. Like I say, it was I didn't have a very simple or straightforward start and progression. So every revisions require quite a lot of how to say, when you thinking about how things can still be gelled together and still make sense. And also I think the other thing is that I definitely need to read more widely. I think, and the fact that new things keep coming up, I need to be updated on what is going on. Yeah.
How about the writing itself, the thinking process of the thesis itself? What have you learned about?
Oh.
I think your current version is quite different, drastically different from previous version. So after making all these changes, what did you learn about?
I think, yeah, I think thinking wise, definitely, I find that I kind of open up a lot more, and also in sometimes step in a way, if I describe it, taking a step back, to look from a different perspective. So that kind of like opens the way I see things, and also, in a sense, to be more critical of myself, of my thinking. So questions, what are my assumptions and what are my, preconceptions and things like that. To be more critical. When I'm doing it, I have a lot of doubts as well. Just that sometimes when I'm so immersed in it, I tend to convince myself that makes sense, that is right. I guess, how do I adopt a more reflective stance? It's important.
Okay, point taken. I think it's also important for you to keep bouncing ideas off.
Yes.
With other people, including, of course, your supervisors with the first point of contact, right? And you have 2 supervisors actually. Okay. So and of course, I'm not sure whether your TSC members, you should try to make full use of all these opportunities to bounce ideas, and to because as you said, okay, individually sometimes we have a lot of blind spot, okay, that we may not realize. Okay, so we talk through with other people, like oral presentation. I think as you prepare the oral presentation, you realize there's something more they can do to make it clearer, right? So all these interactions are important. Like your thesis mentioned, social is important, right? Okay. So do make full use of all these social interactions to perfect ideas. Okay, I no more further questions. Back to you, Adrian.
Thanks. Qiyun?
Okay, thank you, Hon Jia, for your presentation. Can you go back to the research question slide? Okay. The 3 research questions. I cannot remember which slide. No, I remember last time we mentioned, this slide. Okay, I remember last time we mentioned about the 3 research questions, right? They are something very similar, and then this time then you change it to main research question and 2 sub-research questions. And then my question is, I look at the 3 research questions, for example, the first one and the third one. And then the first one, the main one is the social networks in a makerspace influence in interest. And the sub-research question 3, how does the makerspace support student interest? So my question is, it looks like the third one is even bigger than the main one, because the first one is only the social networks in a makerspace. But the third one is, how does the overall makerspace, at least when I look at your statement, and then also the influence interest. The third one is the support student interest. Can you explain a little bit why you think the first one is the main one, and the others, why do you think the others are the sub-research questions? Can you explain a little bit?
I think thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify. I think one of the main things is that the overall focus and context of this study is on the social, the impact of the social context. I think and that's why the main research questions was is anchored by the main research questions, and then how the sub-research question, especially the one in terms of interest in STEM, plays a supportive role, because in the main research question, we didn't look at in particular how it supports STEM related interest in STEM related activity. So I was approaching from this perspective of it is in a more localized and focused area in terms of interest in STEM. However, I do take a point that the term makerspace make it so broad, and I hope that it can be foregrounded by the main research question, which already set the context that for the social influence, and the second one is the sub question was in a smaller context. Yeah.
You mean the sub questions, the RQ2, RQ3?
Yes, yes.
They are in a smaller context.
Yeah.
But they are all in the makerspace context.
Yeah, right? But yeah, more in the makerspace context and more related to the second part of the question, which is on the interest in STEM-related activity. Yeah. So I do note that the questions and the phrasing wasn't itself. When seen alone, it looks very broad. So I think, yeah, it can be improved upon when we set a larger context where these sub-questions can sit in.
Okay. Another question is related to the structure of your dissertation. As Sun-Chi mentioned just now, and then I also realized you have a major change on the structure, even the title of the chapters, the number of chapters, right? You have this round, I think you have 9 chapters, right? Previously 5 chapters. Okay, I look at, actually, yeah, I didn't have much time to go to the detail, but I only look at the structure. For example, chapter 4 is called results, right? Chapter 4 is called results. And then chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, they are all called analysis and analysis of this and that and that. Okay. And chapter 8 is called results and analysis again. So I'm a little bit confused. For example, chapter 4, you call it results, seem to be an overall results or something like that. And then, okay, what's the relationship between chapter 4 and the following chapters? Okay. So why do you put chapter 4 results and the others? What are the following chapters?
Thanks for bringing up. Good point there. The chapter 4 results was only meant in relations to the analysis for 3 of the themes, 3 of the main themes. I think so. Chapter 4 was meant for the themes, namely mode of learning, social and physical support, and autonomy of learner. So that results, that chapter 4's results is only for the 3 themes. And then the subsequent chapters.
Wait. The 3 themes are the answers to RQ1, or what are the 3 themes? So
the 3 themes answer to the 2 sub-research questions.
Oh, and then why do you answer the sub-question first before? Yeah. Once again, go back to the main research question. And then, can you continue? Yeah, I want to hear. Yeah.
Okay, and then chapter. Then there's, as you mentioned, after that there's analysis that has the result and analysis together. I think it's chapter 8 or chapter 9. So that one, chapter 9, I think, that one refers to the results and analysis pertaining to the main research question, which is on the social networks in the makerspace. Because because the results was a lot on the social network part, so I put it separate in a separate chapter.
Okay, once again, can you explain the relationship between the main research question and the 2 sub-questions? So my understanding is sub-question is something like the smaller questions of the main research question, right? And then you have different answers to to the main and the 2 research questions. Am I right? And then in that case, do you think they are sub-questions of the main one? Or?
Okay, I agree. Thanks for pointing out. I agree that there's a possibilities to have different interpretations of either seeing them as main and sub, or should they be all main questions. I think there's a possibility for both interpretations. Having said that, there will be pros and cons in both perspectives. So in the perspective I've taken over here, the sub-research questions serve to, in a sense, tease out, like, so to know how it influences students' interest in learning. So there's some questions on preferred mode of learning that tease out what is the students' inherent so-called preferred learning mode. That can help to provide a perspective towards answering how makerspace influence interest in learning. And second sub-research questions related to interest in STEM related activity. So it's very specific that no doubt they have preferred mode of learning, no doubt social networks under the context of the social networks in the makerspace. Now we want to look at, in this context of the makerspace, how does it influence interest in STEM alone? So we don't ask about interest in other things. So in a way, it's kind of like we try to use that to
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can
And
I,
then
can I
yeah.
to clarify a bit with Dr. Prof. Wang? So basically, your chapter 4, your results, is it from the survey?
Yeah, chapter 4, I show the results from the survey.
Then chapter 5, when you say analysis of theme, mode of learning, is it from the survey?
Yes, from the survey.
Then chapter 6, the theme, social and physical support, is it from the survey?
Yes, from the survey. So from the survey, interview, and
yeah. So basically, I think from what I can see, your chapter 4 results, the label needs to be changed, I think. Okay. But what you're trying to do here, you're trying to look from survey perspective to tease up some of the information about mode of learning, their preferences, their perspective from the interview as well as survey. Okay. And then what you're trying to do here seems to me in your chapter 8 is to put all this together with additional lens of social network analysis. Okay. So I think you're doing a bottom up, basically the sub question first, bottom up, and then you tie everything up together in chapter 8. Okay, that seems to me your structure. Okay? But I think what caused the confusion is because of the term that you use, results, then results analysis. Okay, those terms cause a lot of confusion. Okay, so that's what appears to me. But Prof. Wan, please go ahead to suggest other alternatives.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. So now it becomes clearer to me, I think. Okay, once again, I think it's a follow-up question, and then go back to chapter 9, right? And then you call it discussion. And that seems to be before chapter 9, you also discuss something. For example, in your analysis, you also have discussion. And then once again, your chapter 9, you got discussion implication again. And then my question is, okay, this discussion in chapter 9, how does it relate to the others, or what the difference? Can you explain a little bit? So why do you have another discussion?
Maybe I can. May I use the slides from the
sure.
presentation?
I just try to understand better. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying. Okay. So in a sense, so if this very simplified diagram may do help me in explaining the connections between the main and the sub-research questions. So the main research question paint the context of the makerspace, especially the social context. And the sub-research questions try to tease out something more tacit with the students. So in terms of what is their preferred mode, what is their interest, and then also teasing out things like how does the interest start to transform through, for example, the autonomy given to them, and through the process of them negotiating this autonomy and things like that. So this is how I kind of linked up the three questions, and that's how they interlink each other.
Okay, so the final discussion in chapter 9 looks like it's an overall discussion, right? And And then because in chapter, I think 5, 6, and then when you present the analysis, and then I think you also use the word discussion. So you analyze and then you also discuss. And then I think if you have discussions in different sections, I think you need to make it clear, and then different sections discuss what. And then I think that part, I think need to make it clear. Otherwise, and then usually the discussion is in the final chapter, and then you put all together and then discuss together, right? Okay. Another question. Go back to your chapter 1, because I think last time we mentioned about the problem statement, right? And then chapter 1, and there seems to be, yeah. We suggest you change chapter 1. Okay. I think now chapter 1 is much clearer, but it seems to be now. I look at your chapter 1. I also look at your title, subtitles. For example, you have problem statement. You also have a research problems. You also have a purpose statement. So you have many subtitles. Can you explain the difference between problem statement and the research problems? So you put these two sections in chapter 1. So what did you put? Okay, yeah, what the relationship difference?
I think in the first place, the problem statements are, I would say, cover a much wider context of the problem in general. Could be including the practice, the research, and things like that. Whereas research problem are more focused in the area of research, in the research community. What is the problem, and then where we can focus on in terms of conducting these studies.
Okay, and then the second one seems to be very important. Can you repeat again the first one? What did you put? The problem statement, or what the what did you put?
Okay. Sorry.
The problem statement.
Yeah. May I go back to my
sure.
thesis first? Yeah.
Your chapter 1, under introduction, the first subsection, the section is called problem statement. And then there is another one, it's called research problems. I read these two sections, seem to me very similar. Yeah.
Okay, I understand your
also the title look very similar.
Yes. Should I combine it, or should I rephrase it?
I think, usually we want to have something like a problem statement, or you call it research problems. And then if you separate these two, and then, I want to ask, why do you separate these two? Yeah, I think you can, okay. This is for your consideration, and then why did you separate them? Okay, let me see. Okay, I think I'll stop here. I have some other minor questions. If I have time, I will ask. Yeah, I give the time to Andrew.
Thanks, Willie.
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah. So thank you, Hon Jia, for your effort in revising your thesis and also redo this presentation. I do see there were a lot of improvements from the last presentation. So maybe two areas for consideration make things gel better. I think my first point is also related to Dr. Wang's comments. I think the logic among those three RQs, the logic. So just now you are saying perhaps we can justify from the bigger context, smaller context. I feel this may not be doable because things you are proposing the adapted chat, right? It sounds to me actually you are proposing to interpret interest in a large context rather than in a smaller context, because you are taking a very social cultural perspective. So if we are following this kind of analytical framework, everything needs to be in a larger context. So I'm just thinking, perhaps just for consideration, maybe we may not want to justify from the context perspective to position the RQ2 and 3 as a sub-RQ. Is there a way go with the domain? For example, our main RQ is a social network related. then is that way for us to, do we have a conceptual or theoretical framework to make the, the learning autonomy preferred mode of learning or affordances of makerspace, make them under your RQ? I think you may think along that line, see whether it works or not. Because I think I sense Prof. Wang's concern, because you are proposing to put the other 2 and 3 under RQ1 under sub RQ, but the way you are presenting your findings is they are in parallel. Yeah, because you are having coding this aligned with which RQ. So I think this may cause some confusion. So just for consideration, how are we able to make them gel well, and also in terms of logical reasoning among the 3 RQ, see how can you, are we able to tap on some framework, or you can proposing a framework to put them under one umbrella, which just looks very nice and no confusion. This is my first also reaction to your answers, whether it's in a larger or smaller context for consideration. Okay, so my second point is actually about your coding. Yeah, it sounds to me, because your research focus is in interest, your research title is also interest. But to me, many of the codes and the coding, they are not directly related to interest, but something else. Yeah, for example, preferred mode of learning autonomy. So first of all, we jump from learning autonomy to answer the research question on preferred learning of the mode. I feel there was a gap. So see, how can you further, strengthen this kind of inferences? Why preferred mode of, why the learning autonomy can infer your findings on preferred mode of learning? It sounds to me these 2 are related, but not the same thing, right? So I feel is there sounds to me as a gap. See how are we able to further bridge that? And also the code, right? The code normally, so you have it sounds to me you are coding observation nodes. Is that because your data is the students are doing activity in groups? I think this is your raw data, rather than, because previously I thought the data you are students discourse interaction, because things you are taking the social network analysis, this kind of analytical lens. But what is your raw data? What your raw data is students discourse on observation notes.
Okay, so maybe I will thanks for giving me the opportunity and also suggesting some of the possible.
That part, and we will see how we can help to further, because it sounds to me there was it's the jump, the coding, so how we make the logic stronger, so you can go to your coding, that part.
Okay, so
I think you can go maybe a few slides earlier than that. Yeah. So your code, your original code, your raw data, then how you make inference from your raw data.
Okay, I guess there are 2 parts to your point here. One is related to the research questions. The other one is on the coding part. So let me discuss about the coding part first. Just like mentioned, is it through discourse or through observation notes? I would say both. So the coding based on most of it based on discourse, some of it based on observational notes. So it's a combination of interpretations of the data that's from discourse as well as observations.
Yeah. So because the example you used in your previous slides, in your methodology section, they are all observation notes. And those observation notes are very high level kind of a statement. For example, students work in groups. This is your raw data. But actually, if we are taking the social network analysis point of view, we really need to look at, within this group activity, how did they interact with each other, and how are they going to interact across groups? So I think that part I'm not sure. Maybe you have it in your thesis, but it can make it more explicit. Yeah, and that kind of finding can have a stronger, support for your adapted chat, right? Okay, so one last point is for your future work, right? Future work. You may or may not want to include it in your thesis. I feel it's very interesting to me. You are having the adapted chat, right? Adapted chat, but I think I am able to sense, Prof. Dan's concern. Do you have cases to support this? So perhaps in your future work, you may also consider. So actually, social network analysis can be used to be part of the finding of to support this kind of adapted chat. In your adapted chat is like a cross-community kind of things, right? So social network analysis currently, it sounds to me, maybe you are looking at the individual level social network analysis within the group density, right? Within the group density rather than classroom density. Am I right? Because in your working context, I believe actually your unit of analysis for social network analysis, you have two layers. One layer is within group density. Another one is the whole class density, because I'm able to see you have many sessions of a makerspace session. So for each session, there could be different density at the classroom level, also could be at the group level, right? Yes. So if you are taking, if your unit analysis is a cross-group type of social network analysis, it may lend support to some extent for your adaptive chat, because your adaptive chat, just now you're saying one triangle is one group. One group is a community, and the other triangle is going to be another community. So, yeah, so perhaps, so I'm not saying you have to include in your current thesis. I'm just suggesting in your future work, maybe you want to publish paper in the future, try to make full use of the data. You can think whether you are able to, through the social network analysis perspective, by having some support for this adapted chat. Yeah, just for your consideration. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. There's so much more to learn.
No, I'm not saying you have to include in your current thesis, because just now things we are discussing, because that is very interesting finding for me. But I also feel, but from your findings, from your current empirical evidence to this framework, there was no strong support from your presentation. Maybe you have it in your thesis, but from your presentation, you have this finding, but suddenly, why? So it's a nice framework, but where's the, evidence and the reasoning? So I'm just thinking along that line, see whether we can help in this regards, make this kind of connection stronger. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from any of the examiners? Chi-Yun, you have some time if you want to ask. Unmute. Yeah.
Okay. It's no questions now, only some suggestions. For example, you have now many more chapters than before. I think you need to relook at the chapters and then reorganize the chapters and then to present in a better way to answer your research questions. And then also go back to your research questions. So now you have a main one, you have two sub questions, and then you need to think, because somewhere you present a main and two sub questions, but somewhere you also present in a parallel at the same level. I think that one you really need to think about it, and then how to answer the questions. The other one, probably if you have 3 research questions or 2 research questions, and then your findings or results, it's better to present your findings to answer the questions, and then rather than to present your survey, interview, and social network, and then based on the instruments, the data collected from instruments, and then it's better to present your answers to your questions. Because you have questions, you need to answer the questions. It's not to present the data from the instrument. You need to combine, synthesize the data, and then I think the other one also related to my discussion, my question, and then if you have a discussion, and then somewhere if you don't want to change the structure, somewhere you need to make it very clear. So I will discuss what in which section. I will give an overall discussion in the final chapter. Somewhere we want to see something like an overview, overview description, something like that, and then at least to make us better. Oh, maybe read it, or at least even though it looks like this, and then I'm very clear. Oh, this section is about this section. Otherwise, and then we look at it. Hey, how come they are presented in this way? Yeah, I think that the content is there, the information is there. The thing is how to better present, how to better structure the content. Yeah, yeah. These are my suggestions. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll definitely take note of that.
Okay. I assume there are no more further questions. No. Okay. Good. Thank you, Hon Jia. Okay. I will need you to leave this conversation while we discuss, and then maybe later on your supervisors can ping you back. So don't go too far, because I'm not sure whether I can link you back so easily.
Okay.
Using this account that you're having. Okay.
Okay, Ken, thank you. I will sign.
Hey, Hon Jia, welcome back.
Thanks.
Okay. I'll just go straight to the point. The panel has discussed, and then you passed. Congratulations. However, there will be some amendments that you need to make. Arising from today's discussion, we have seen that you have made a lot of effort, in addressing the concerns of, arising from the previous round. But there are still remaining concerns, which I'm sure you can sense through the questions from the two examiners as well as your head, AG. So we will give you the list of things that you need to work on, right? And then use this chance to again strengthen your understanding of your own thesis. One very, very quick feedback, this encouragement for you is that is for you to think about how you can better scholar by adopting some of the the scholar habits that we have, like we like to challenge points, we like to discuss, debate, and then we accept it when we are wrong, right? So this is something that is very, very normal as scholars. Sometimes I have a review coming back and I will like curse and swear in the first 1 hour. Then after that, I quietly sit down and say, "Oh yeah, I agree with all the points." So this is part and parcel. So do take all this process as important process that you can grow. Okay. So thank you very much for putting in the effort. Yep.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Hon Jia. Congratulations to the two supervisors.
Thank you. Thank you.
Prof Wang.
Yeah, congratulations.
Okay. Yeah, LC graduate, another PhD student.
Okay,
Thanks.
good. Do you want to say something?
It has been a very long journey for not just for myself and also for my supervisors, and also I know that a lot of people have been supporting me and trying to help me, and I really appreciate it. I hope that when I look back, I really this journey really meant a lot to me, and I hope I can really make a lot from it and grow a lot. Yeah, and I do hope that we can in future continue to have these interactions, and I definitely hope to cultivate more of the scholarly dispositions.
Yep. Good. You have
Please
potential.
publish your work, okay? Please, after revision, please publish your work, okay?
Yes, thank you.
With your supervisors.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Keep up the good work, Hon Jia. Okay,
Thank
one
you.
last step to go, okay? Let's revise your proposal, your thesis. Okay,
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.